see the people in the street, hear the tramping of the feet. Today's a holiday.
March 19, 1932 was the biggest day in Sydney's history. For the first time, the eyes of the world were on Australia as hundreds of thousands gathered for the opening of the mighty bridge.
When the planes up in the sky fly above the span so high, they're opening the bridge today.
Its construction was an extraordinary story of struggle, sacrifice, and bitter conflict. In the official party that day is the public servant and engineer, Dr. J.J.C. Bradfield, who has made the bridge his life's passion, and according to some, has stolen the credit for its design. There too is the ruthless Premier Jack Lang. For months now he's been locked in a titanic struggle with the British governor, Sir Philip Game, whose wife, Lady Gwendolen, has warned Buckingham Palace that Australia is on the verge of violent revolution. And in the crowd are dark forces, determined to stop Lang at all costs. There are plots to kidnap the Premier, even stage an armed uprising against the government. For all of them, the Sydney Harbour Bridge has become a symbol, much more than just its steel and stone. The giant span carries the heaviest weight of any bridge in the world, and the added burden of the hopes and dreams of an entire nation. By the end of the day, Australia's future will be decided. It was just a bridge. How had it come to this? Nearly 50 years earlier, in 1886, the son of a Queensland railway worker arrived at Sydney University to take up a scholarship. John Job Crewe Bradfield was one of just 3 engineering students in the entire colony, and driven by an extraordinary dream.
Grandfather was walking with his wife along the foreshore of Milson's Point in 1893, not long after they'd come to Sydney. And he said at that time, looking across the harbour, I'm going to build a bridge across the harbour.
It was ambition bordering on arrogance. For 150 years, Sydney was a city divided. It's a maze of waterways cut by a slim but deep divide. From the moment the first fleet arrived, there were dreams of building a link between the two shores of the harbour. Barely 500 metres across at its narrowest point, the early settlers could stand on one shore and shout across to the other. It's a tantalising challenge, so close and yet so far. Engineers had long dreamt improbable schemes for bridging the harbour, or tunnelling beneath, but they came to nothing. No steel was strong enough, no technology advanced enough, the colony nowhere near rich enough. Bradfield himself lived on the North Shore, and every day took the crowded ferry to his job as lead engineer in the Department of Works. He would spend 40 years as a public servant, transforming his adopted city.
He was consumed with the view that Sydney would one day become a great city. Sydney was still somewhat of a ramshackle designed town. He changed all that.
When I visualised the future, I feel that I was born 30 years too soon, because the achievement of today will be but a stepping stone for greater feats necessary for the development of this great city.
He imagined a city that would become a shining diamond in Britain's empire. But it would remain just a fantasy unless he could bring the two shores together. And for that, he needed to build a giant bridge right through Sydney's heart.
By that time, of course, Sydney and Melbourne were 2 of the 20 biggest cities in the world. So people travelled to other world cities, especially places like New York, to see what they were doing. Of course, what they were doing in New York was madly building bridges all over the place.
The great engineers of America and Europe favoured either suspension bridges or a cantilever design, where two balanced supports hold a central roadway. Bradfield believed he could build a cantilever across the harbour. From 1900 he pushed his plan, but no government was brave enough to take it on.
Over and over again the bridge has been raised as an apolitical issue, has been promised and has again and again been pigeonholed. Yeah. Every door of our progress should be inscribed with the words, "Too late. Wait and see." Yeah.
Gentlemen.
For Bradfield, wait and see would never do. He went over the heads of weak-willed politicians and took his dream to the public.
I have endeavoured to blend utility and strength with beauty and simplicity so that the bridge can in some degree typify the...
He sort of captures the imagination and he's able to address sort of multiple audiences. So he'll write for the professional press extensively, all the engineering journals, but he'll write for hobby magazines about his schemes. He'll write for the newspapers of the time, do radio broadcasts. And he plays a role that it's almost like he's a government minister, but one that's in power for 20 years.
Australia has an inner life, and we still have our dreams of beauty, truth, and justice.
In 1912, his decade of effort was rewarded when the government at last committed to the project. This is the bridge we should have had, and construction was about to begin, when events on the other side of the world put an end to it. The First World War cost 60,000 Australian lives and hobbled our young economy. Spending on a bridge was out of the question. Others may have given up, but Bradfield would never abandon his obsession.
The men who will be most successful will be those who, with self-reliance, have learned how to wait, and wait patiently.
Bradfield would need patience. Australia was so undeveloped it couldn't make steel or even build a car, let alone the greatest bridge on earth. And parochial politicians didn't share the engineer's vision.
I really don't know, Mr. Bradfield. You know, the country people are very tired of paying for things from the city.
Above all, what Australia lacked was cash. Governments would need to gamble with borrowed money if Bradfield was to have his way. In 1920, New South Wales narrowly elected a Labor government, and Bradfield went looking for a sponsor. Sydney's Parliament is Australia's oldest and roughest.
When a government realises it's losing its grip on its political perspective,
And on the floor, there was an intimidating presence, the new Treasurer, a politician who seemed destined for big things. The press already called him the big fella.
Well, if you can't win a debate, let's wreck it. Well, that is not the Jack Lang way. That is not the Jack Lang way.
In Jack Lang, Bradfield had found the gambler he needed. And in the bridge, Lang found the cause that would carry him through his tumultuous career.
Jack Lang was one of those characters that you could both love and hate at the same time. Everything he did had passion about it.
We won't be told by the legal people how we are to run this country.
He was energy and motion when he spoke, you know, his fists raised in the air.
Even in his 90s, he was still breathing the fire and brimstone that had made him such a controversial figure.
The Labour movement has the power when it will to change the law and to take the power peacefully, without bloodshed, without murder, without death.
Lang inspired both a legion of critics and an army of acolytes, among them a future Prime Minister.
He was, without a doubt, in the first half of the 20th century, the political figure of Australia. For Labor voting people, working class people, yeah, you could hardly wonder that they could have had a more powerful or effective representative.
He was paranoid. He did some good things and he had a social conscience, sure, but in his personal life he was extremely difficult, and his essential motivation in life was hatred for those who he perceived to be his opponents, which virtually seemed to be everyone else except himself.
I agree. It's something.
Bradfield and Lang were an odd couple. They shared little except overwhelming ambition. And the wily engineer made it his job to convince Lang that the bridge could be the big fella's gift to history.
And he seduced Lang with his vision. Lang delighted in Bradfield knocking on his door and asking if he could talk to him about his next set of plans, because he knew that this was one man. This was one of those chosen people who had vision and who had practical vision as well.
He comes down to the office with plans under his arms and is prepared to expound them by the hour if given the opportunity. Well, I give him every encouragement because he's so different from the average public official. I mean, I realise he's a dreamer, but behind it is the conviction that he is planning the greatest city in the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, as he talks, you can almost see a new city emerging.
Bradfield planned 2 great avenues sweeping through the city, while beneath, his new commuters would be delivered to Sydney's centre by an underground. Everything in the way would have to go.
He was committed and he wanted that bridge, and he wanted that bridge built at whatever cost it took.
Even before Parliament had committed to the bridge, Lang borrowed £10 million from British banks and began work. Tunnels were dug in 1922 and progress seemed unstoppable. Then, just a month after work began, victory once again slipped from Bradfield's grasp when Lang and Labour were tumbled from office. Once more, the fate of the Great Bridge lay in the balance. The incoming government was no friend of the bridge, and with a vote on its future only weeks away, Bradfield tirelessly lobbied for support.
It will be called the Anzac Bridge.
A symbol, Mr. Bradfield, but a very expensive one, I fear.
At what cost? The greatest...
His diaries, never shown before, reveal his extraordinary determination.
Do not think the government is in earnest re the bridge bill. They have introduced it in such a way as to ensure defeat. However, the work I have done will not be lost. It is one chapter in the romance of the Sydney Harbour Bridge which someday I hope to write. I will see my romance of the bridge become a reality.
Can you imagine having spent 21 years of your life and then putting all the eggs are in one basket and they're handed off to the politicians, and still he wasn't sure of the numbers.
In November 1922, the bill authorising the Harbour Bridge came to a vote. This was the crucial moment when Bradfield's career and Sydney's future would be decided.
The ayes have it!
At last, Bradfield had his way. Now he had to live up to the immense expectations.
We can leave this to him. Our great engineer has devised a scheme in which he has worked out details to the last bolt in the bridge.
The politicians may have been less relaxed had they known Bradfield was guarding an amazing secret. Thousands have turned out for the ceremony marking the start of work. But this was an event staged for the camera. They're celebrating a bridge that only Bradfield knows will never be built. For 20 years he's been recommending a cantilever, but the engineers dumped the old model, yet for now has nothing to replace it.
Bradfield was not a stubborn man, he was a very clever man, and at the last minute he realised that the bridge he was asking to be built was yesterday's model, and he wanted tomorrow's.
On a visit to New York, Bradfield had a vision of the future. The Hell Gate Bridge, designed by Gustav Lindenthal. The arch was not only graceful, it needed less steel than a cantilever, making it cheaper than the design he'd sold back home. Critics would later claim Bradfield all but stole Lindenthal's design for himself. What he needed now was steel strong enough to hold up the heaviest bridge in history, 50,000 tons in all. Bradfield visited the iron and steel giants of England, and in the smelters of Teesside heard of a new silicon steel stronger than anything made before. British know-how can give him the bridge he wants.